The dust on Ethan Walker's boots was 3 days old, and he had made certain of that. On a warm June morning in 1881, he stood on the outskirts of Red Creek, Wyoming territory, wearing a faded blue work shirt he had deliberately dragged through the mud behind his horse barn. His brown vest was missing 2 buttons. One knee of his trousers had been crudely patched. The brim of his hat had a tear in it that Ethan himself had made with his pocket knife. Anyone looking at him would have seen a tired ranch hand who had probably spent his last few dollars getting into town. That was exactly what Ethan wanted them to see. What they could not see was the deed locked inside the iron safe in his ranch house. More than 16,000 acres of grazing land, 8,000 head of cattle, several profitable water rights, and an account at the First Territorial Bank in Cheyenne containing more money than most families in Red Creek would earn in several lifetimes. None of it showed. That was the point. Ethan walked into town with an old canvas feed sack over one shoulder and allowed the dirt on his hands to introduce him before he said a word. He was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, strong from more than 20 years of real ranch work. The muscles in his back and arms had not been built for appearance. He had broken horses, repaired fences, delivered calves in freezing weather, fought prairie fires, and spent entire winters keeping cattle alive through blizzards. There was one thing about Ethan, however, that the people of Red Creek could not have guessed. He was looking for a wife, and he intended to make sure she had no idea he was wealthy. 11 years earlier, Ethan had buried his first wife. Her name had been Rebecca. They had married young when Ethan's ranch was beginning to prosper. At first, he had believed she loved him. Over time, he began to understand that she loved what his success provided more than she loved the man who had earned it. The bigger the ranch became, the more distant their marriage became. Rebecca wanted dresses from Denver, furniture from Chicago, silver from New York. She spoke constantly about parties, houses, status, and people Ethan had never cared to impress. Whenever he came home covered in dust after 15 hours in the saddle, she looked at him as though the rancher had become an inconvenience attached to the fortune. Then fever swept through the territory. Rebecca became sick. Within a week, she was gone. Ethan mourned her. Whatever had happened between them, she had been his wife. But grief did not erase the lesson their marriage had taught him. Money changed the way people looked at a man. It changed their smiles. It changed their voices. It changed what they claimed to admire. Ethan had spent 11 years alone after Rebecca's death. Then, as he approached 40, he realized that the loneliness waiting inside his large ranch house had become harder to ignore. He wanted someone beside him, someone who would see Ethan Walker before she saw Walker Ranch. So he created a test. A foolish test, perhaps, but one he believed he needed. He would spend several weeks in a town where no one knew him. He would dress as a poor ranch hand. He would say he was looking for work and hoping eventually to find a woman willing to build a life with him. Only after he knew her character would he tell her the truth. Red Creek seemed perfect. It was far enough from Ethan's ranch that his face was unfamiliar, but close enough that he could return home if necessary. When people asked his name, he gave only his first name, Ethan. He never mentioned Walker Ranch. He never mentioned the thousands of cattle grazing 45 miles west. He simply said he was a ranch hand looking for steady employment, and perhaps a wife. He said the last part quietly, almost apologetically, the way a poor man might admit that he needed something he could not afford. Red Creek made up its mind about him before lunchtime. The town was wrong, but it would take the rest of the summer to understand how wrong. The first place Ethan tried was Caldwell's Dry Goods. 3 women stood near the counter comparing bolts of cotton. Ethan waited until they noticed him. Then he removed his torn hat. "Excuse me, ladies." They looked at him. One looked curious, another looked uncomfortable. The third, Margaret Caldwell, looked him over from his dusty boots to the tear in his hat. Margaret was 29, unmarried, and the daughter of the store owner. Ethan had been told she knew nearly everyone in Red Creek. He cleared his throat. "I'm new in town, looking for ranch work. I was also wondering if there might be any unmarried women around here interested in meeting a man who hopes to settle down." Margaret blinked. "A rancher?" "Ranch hand, mostly," her mouth curved. "With that outfit, I would guess you raise chickens behind somebody's barn." The other women laughed. Ethan felt heat climb his neck. He had expected rejection. He had not expected humiliation to sting quite so much when he had deliberately invited it. Margaret leaned closer to her friends. "He probably owns 3 chickens and owes money on 2 of them." More laughter. Ethan replaced his hat. "Thank you for your time." He walked out while the little brass bell above the door rang behind him. Across the street stood a boarding house. He tried there next. The owner, Ruth Parker, was a 47-year-old widow with silver beginning to show in her dark hair. She studied Ethan through the screen door without opening it. "I'm hoping to rent a room for a few days," Ethan said. Ruth's eyes dropped to the feed sack. "Can you pay?" "Yes, ma'am." "Beforehand?" "Yes." She still did not open the door. Ethan asked if she knew anyone needing ranch help. Then, with increasing embarrassment, he asked whether she knew any unmarried woman who might be willing to meet him. Ruth gave him a long stare. "We don't take charity cases here." "I'm not asking for charity." "And I don't know a woman foolish enough to marry one." The door closed. By noon, Ethan had been rejected at 4 homes. He had been laughed at twice in the general store. Someone had apparently seen him repairing a loose strap on his canvas sack and decided that he must be carrying all his worldly possessions with him. By early afternoon, the story had grown. A penniless drifter was wandering Red Creek asking women to marry him. By 3 o'clock, he supposedly had no horse. By 4, somebody claimed he had been sleeping in barns. Neither story was true. Ethan's horse was boarded outside town, and he had enough cash sewn inside his saddlebag to buy the boarding house. But rumors had little interest in facts. That afternoon, Red Creek held its annual church picnic beneath a stand of cottonwood trees. Nearly 50 people gathered around long tables. There were pies, lemonade, fried chicken, cornbread, beans, and children running between blankets laid across the grass. Ethan stood near the edge of the gathering, holding a cup of lemonade he had poured for himself. No one invited him to sit. A group of young women near the drink table noticed him. One whispered something. Another laughed. Then Margaret Caldwell's voice carried clearly across the lawn. "There he is." Someone asked, "Who?" "The chicken rancher." More laughter. The name traveled faster than Ethan expected. The chicken rancher. He lowered his eyes to the lemonade. He had created the disguise himself. Every patch, every stain, every carefully planned sign of poverty. Still, there was something surprisingly painful about discovering how quickly respectable people became cruel when they believed cruelty carried no cost. For a moment, Ethan considered ending the experiment. He could ride to Walker Ranch that evening. Return in a clean coat with 6 riders behind him. Walk into Caldwell's store and watch Margaret's face change when she learned who he was. The thought tempted him. Then he noticed a woman standing apart from everyone else. She was near the old stone wall surrounding the church cemetery. A sewing basket rested against one hip. Her name, Ethan would soon learn, was Grace Lee. She was 32 years old. She wore a simple pale green cotton dress, clean but repeatedly mended. Her black hair was pinned neatly behind her head. Grace was American. She had been born in San Francisco to Chinese-American parents and had grown up speaking English as naturally as anyone else in Red Creek. But people still regularly asked where she was really from. Her answer was always the same: California. Grace had come east with her husband, Daniel Lee, also an American-born son of Chinese immigrants. Daniel had worked on railroad construction crews. 2 years earlier, he had been killed when a rock slide struck a grading crew north of Red Creek. The railroad company paid Grace almost nothing. Daniel left behind a few tools, some debts, and the small laundry business they had built together. Since then, Grace had survived as a seamstress and laundress. Cowboys brought her torn shirts, families brought bedding, railroad workers brought work clothes stiff with mud. She lived in 2 rooms behind the laundry with her widowed aunt, May Lee, who had helped raise her. Grace had noticed Ethan earlier that day. She had seen Margaret laugh at him. She had watched Ruth Parker refuse to open the boarding house door. She had heard enough gossip to understand what the town believed. Unlike the others, she had not laughed. At the picnic, Ethan saw her lift her sewing basket. Then she crossed the grass toward him. "You look like you need something stronger than lemonade," she said. Ethan stared at her. She nodded toward the church. "There is a well behind the building. The water is colder." For several seconds, Ethan forgot to answer. Finally, he said, "That sounds good." Grace's expression softened slightly. "You've been rejected 4 times today." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You counted." "I noticed." "That's worse." "It might be." He almost laughed. It was the first genuine laugh he had allowed himself all day. Grace led him toward the well. She did not ask how much money he had. She did not ask who his family was. She did not ask whether he owned land. She asked if he had eaten. Ethan admitted that he had not. Grace opened the cloth bundle she had packed for herself. Inside was cold roast chicken cornbread and 2 small apples. She divided everything in half. Ethan hesitated. He knew immediately that this was not extra food. It was her dinner. "I can't take half of that." "You can. You packed it for yourself." "I know what I packed it for," he smiled. "You always argue this efficiently, only when I'm hungry." He accepted. They sat on the low cemetery wall while the picnic continued behind them. For almost an hour, Ethan Walker, owner of more land than anyone in 3 neighboring districts, shared a working widow's dinner and said almost nothing about himself. For the first time in 11 years, a conversation did not feel like a negotiation. Grace told him about California, about the Pacific fog she remembered from childhood, about the wagon trip east, about learning to sew from her mother. Ethan told her he had worked cattle most of his life. That part was true. He told her he preferred horses to people on difficult days. Also true. He told her he had been married once and had been alone for 11 years. Grace did not pry. She simply said, 11 years is a long time." "It is." "Maybe that's why you're asking half the town to marry you." Ethan nearly choked on his cornbread. Grace looked completely serious for 2 seconds. Then he saw amusement in her eyes. "So you've heard that version?" "Everyone has. I asked if anyone might be interested in meeting me. By tomorrow, they'll say you proposed to the church choir." "How many women are in the choir?" 7. "That could damage my reputation." For the first time, Grace laughed. It changed her whole face. Ethan remembered that laugh long after the food was gone. But the peace of the afternoon did not last. When Ethan walked Grace back toward the laundry, Margaret Caldwell and 2 friends were standing on Ruth Parker's porch. Margaret's voice carried across the road. "Well, look at that." Grace's shoulders tightened. "The chicken rancher found himself a bride." The women laughed. Margaret continued. "A laundress for a beggar. Seems appropriate." Ethan stopped. Grace did not. "Keep walking," she said softly. His jaw tightened. There had been a time when Ethan could end an insult by saying his full name. Walker Ranch bought supplies from half the merchants in the territory. His cattle contracts influenced shipping schedules. Bankers knew him. Territorial officials returned his letters. But he had chosen poverty as a costume. A poor stranger had no social weapon to use against Margaret Caldwell. So Ethan swallowed his anger and followed Grace. When they were beyond hearing distance, he said, "You shouldn't have had to hear that." "I've heard worse." "That doesn't make it right." "No." Grace's voice remained steady, but something guarded had returned to her expression. "Don't walk with me tomorrow." Ethan stopped. Why? It will make things harder for you. Harder for me? You're trying to find a wife. So everyone keeps reminding me. If you're seen spending time with me, that search will end quickly. I haven't noticed great progress so far. Grace almost smiled, but did not. They had reached the laundry. Its walls were made from mismatched boards repaired over many years. A lantern glowed inside. Aunt May moved between hanging sheets. Grace turned toward Ethan. Good night, Ethan. Grace. She paused. Thank you for dinner. Half a dinner. Best half I've had in a while. This time she smiled. Then she went inside. Ethan remained in the road for several minutes. He had come to Red Creek to discover which woman might treat him kindly without knowing what he owned. He had not expected to discover that showing him kindness could cost that woman more than it cost him. He returned the next morning anyway. Grace was already working. Her sleeves were rolled above her elbows. Both hands were submerged in a large wash tub. Steam drifted from the nearby boiler. What are you doing here? She asked. Looking for work. I don't have money to hire you. I didn't ask for money. Then you're not looking for work. Ethan spotted 2 empty buckets. Where's your well? Grace narrowed her eyes. Behind the building. He picked up the buckets. I'll start there. You don't need to, I know. Ethan. He looked back. She shook her head, as though she had encountered a particularly stubborn mule. He carried the buckets away. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine formed. Ethan arrived most mornings. He carried water. He split firewood for the wash boilers. He repaired a section of fence around Grace's vegetable garden. He fixed a warped door. He climbed onto the roof during a rainstorm to patch a leak above the ironing table. Grace protested nearly every time. Her protests gradually became ritual rather than resistance. You know I can do that myself. I know. Then why are you doing it? Because I'm already holding the hammer. Sometimes Grace made lunch. Sometimes Ethan brought food from the general store. He always chose inexpensive items, so his disguise remained believable. They ate on the wooden bench outside the laundry. Ethan learned about Grace in pieces. Her husband, Daniel, had joined a railroad crew in 1875. Grace followed him the next year. They had intended to save money and return west. Instead, Daniel saw opportunity in Red Creek. The town had railroad workers, ranchers, freight drivers, and almost no reliable laundry service. They rented a small building and started one themselves. Then came the rock slide. The railroad's contract included language releasing the company from certain injuries and deaths. Daniel had signed it. Grace was left with almost nothing. She applied for a bank loan to keep the laundry open. The loan officer refused her. He told her a widow without a husband guaranteeing the debt represented too much risk. When she found another possible lender, he offered money only if she surrendered partial ownership of the business. Grace refused. So she worked. Then worked more. She washed clothes until her hands cracked. She sewed by lamplight. She grew vegetables behind the building. She saved pennies. She paid Daniel's debts one by one. Ethan listened. The more he learned, the worse his deception felt. One evening they sat outside while the setting sun turned the hills copper. Ethan asked, "Why do you stay?" Grace looked toward him. "In Red Creek? What about it? This town hasn't exactly been generous to you." Grace considered the question. Finally, she looked at the laundry. "Because I built something here." Ethan waited. "It's small," she continued. "It doesn't impress anybody, but it's mine. Daniel and I started it with our own hands. After he died, I kept it alive with mine." She rubbed her thumb across one palm. "No one gave it to me. No one can tell me I didn't earn it." Then she looked at Ethan. "Why do you stay?" "What? You've been laughed at since the day you arrived. Why haven't you left?" Ethan nearly told her. The truth rose into his throat. Walker Ranch. 16,000 acres, thousands of cattle. A ranch house large enough for 10 people, occupied by one lonely man. He wanted to tell her everything, but fear stopped him. Not fear that Grace wanted his money. The opposite. He already knew she did not. He feared the expression on her face when she learned that his poverty had been a performance. He had begun this experiment to protect himself. Now he understood that the longer it continued, the more likely it was to hurt her. Still, he delayed. "I suppose I found a reason to stay." Grace looked at him for a moment. She understood what he meant. Neither of them said more. 3 days later, Trouble arrived on horseback. Silas Mercer was 48 years old and owned the largest freight company operating through Red Creek. He had wagons, horses, warehouses, and political influence. For months, Mercer had wanted the land occupied by Grace's laundry. His freight yard bordered it. Expanding onto Grace's property would allow him to build another storage barn beside the railroad spur. On Tuesday afternoon, Mercer rode into Grace's yard with 2 employees. Grace stepped outside. Ethan was behind the laundry splitting wood. Mercer remained mounted. "You've had enough time, Mrs. Lee." Grace looked up at him. "Enough time for what?" "To move. This is my property." "That's disputed." "No. You keep saying it's disputed." Mercer pulled a folded paper from his coat. "I have a survey showing my company holds the older boundary claim. My husband registered this property in 1875. Then he registered land that wasn't his." Grace's face went still. "I have the original filing." Mercer smiled. "A paper filed by a dead railroad laborer isn't going to help you much." One of his men laughed. Ethan lowered the axe. Mercer continued, "I need this cleared by Friday." Grace folded her arms. "I'm not leaving." "Then I'll clear it myself." Ethan crossed the yard. He did not hurry. He did not threaten anyone. But 20 years of commanding ranch crews had shaped something in the way he moved. Mercer's men stopped smiling. Ethan looked at the paper in Mercer's hand. "Show me." Mercer stared down at him. "What?" "Your survey. Show me yours, and Grace can show me hers." "This doesn't concern you." "It does now." Mercer looked at Ethan's torn hat, his dirty vest, his worn boots. "Go back to splitting wood, drifter." Ethan's expression did not change. "The Territorial Land Office is 2 days away. I can check the original registration." Mercer laughed. "You?" "Yes." "With what money I'll manage." Mercer's smile disappeared slightly. Ethan continued, "My guess is Grace's filing is legitimate. My second guess is you're counting on her not having enough money or influence to challenge you." The yard became quiet. Grace stared at Ethan. There was something different in his voice. Gone was the uncertain ranch hand who had allowed Margaret Caldwell to laugh at him. The man standing before Silas Mercer sounded accustomed to being obeyed. Mercer noticed it too. "Friday," he said. Grace did not move. Mercer pointed toward the building. "After Friday, this comes down." He turned his horse. Ethan called after him, "Bring your original claim when you come back." Mercer glanced over his shoulder. "Why?" "So you'll have something to explain to the judge." Mercer's face hardened. Then he rode away. Grace waited until the 3 men disappeared down the road. She turned toward Ethan. "You shouldn't have done that. He was threatening you. Men like Silas Mercer remember who stands against them." "Let him remember." Grace studied him, really studied him. "Who are you?" Ethan said nothing. "A penniless ranch hand doesn't speak to Silas Mercer like that." "I've dealt with men like him." "Where?" "On ranches." "Which ranches?" Ethan looked away. Grace's eyes narrowed. "There's something you're not telling me." He knew his lie had reached its limit. Still, the deadline came first. "I'll explain everything after this is settled. Everything, everything. You give me your word." "I do." Grace was not satisfied, but she nodded. The trip to the territorial land office normally required nearly 2 full days in one direction. Ethan made it much faster. He retrieved his horse and rode hard through the night. By morning, his disguise hardly mattered. He looked genuinely exhausted. At the land office, he requested Daniel Lee's original filing. The clerk moved slowly until Ethan finally gave his full name. Ethan Walker. The man's head snapped upward. Walker Ranch, yes. His attitude changed immediately. Ethan noticed. And for the first time, he hated the change. The clerk found the original records. Daniel's claim was valid. It had been registered 18 months before anything Silas Mercer could produce. Ethan requested a certified copy. Then he asked the clerk to write a statement confirming the date and legal status of the property. Before leaving, Ethan paid the filing fees required to guarantee that Grace's ownership record could not conveniently disappear. He did not change the ownership. He did not buy the property. He did not attach his name to it. Grace Lee remained the sole owner. That mattered to him. He rode back toward Red Creek, carrying the documents inside his coat. On the road, however, he finally admitted something he had avoided for weeks. He had been unfair to Grace. He had created a test without her consent. Every insult he received was something he had chosen. Every insult Grace received for associating with him was not. He could not undo that. He could only stop lying. Thursday evening, Ethan reached Red Creek. He learned that Mercer was inside the Silver Star Saloon. Ethan entered, still covered in road dust. A dozen men were drinking. Mercer sat at the bar with several freight workers. Ethan placed the certified filing in front of him. Registered in 1875. Mercer looked down. 18 months before your claim. Mercer read the document. The land belongs to Grace Lee, legally and completely. You rode all the way to the territorial office for a laundress? I rode there for a woman whose property you were trying to steal. Mercer slowly turned. Big words for a man who chops firewood from meals. Ethan looked around the saloon. Several faces were familiar. Men who had laughed at him. Men who had called him the chicken rancher. Men who had never once asked whether the story about him was true. Ethan removed his torn hat. My name is Ethan Walker. Silence spread through the room. Mercer frowned. Ethan continued. I own Walker Ranch 45 miles west of here. Someone near a card table stopped moving. 16,000 acres, 8,000 head of cattle, water rights on 3 sections of the North Platte, and enough money in the Cheyenne Bank to purchase your freight company without needing a loan. Mercer's face changed. Ethan placed both hands on the bar. I've dressed like a poor ranch hand for the last 5 weeks because I wanted to know how people treated a man when they believed he had nothing. No one spoke. It has been educational. A few men lowered their eyes. Ethan continued. I came here looking for a wife. Someone coughed awkwardly. I wanted to meet a woman who saw the man before she saw his property. Ethan tapped the land document. The only woman in this town who offered me food when she believed I couldn't afford my own was the same woman you thought was too powerless to defend her land. Mercer stared at him. You're lying. Go to Cheyenne. Ethan's voice remained calm. Ask the bank president. He put his hat back on. Or ride 45 miles west tomorrow and count the cattle. Mercer looked at the paper again. Ethan leaned closer. The land is hers. Mercer said nothing. You knew your claim was weak. You thought a widow running a laundry wouldn't have the time, money, or influence to fight you. Ethan picked up the certified copy. You were wrong. Then he walked out. By sunrise, everyone in Red Creek knew. Margaret Caldwell heard before breakfast. Ruth Parker heard before opening the boarding house. By 9 o'clock, people who had never offered Ethan a chair were suddenly eager to speak with him. The change was almost comical. A storekeeper offered him free coffee. A rancher invited him to dinner. A man who had ignored Ethan at the church picnic slapped him on the shoulder and claimed he had known all along that Ethan was no ordinary drifter. Ethan accepted none of it. He rode directly to Grace's laundry. She was outside when he arrived. Her expression told him she already knew. So it's true. Ethan dismounted. Yes. Ethan Walker. Yes. Walker Ranch. Yes. 16,000 acres. He winced. People talk quickly. You should know that by now. He held his hat in both hands. I should have told you when Mercer came. Gare said nothing. I should have told you before that. Still nothing. Ethan continued. I let it go too far. Grace folded her arms. Why? He looked at her. I was afraid. That answer surprised her. Afraid of what? Watching you change. Grace's jaw tightened. Why would I change? I didn't know. You thought I might suddenly become interested in your money? No. Then what did you think? Ethan struggled for words. Grace stepped closer. You let this entire town think you were a beggar. I know. You let them laugh at you. Yes. You let them laugh at me because I sat beside you. Ethan looked down. Yes. And every day, you could have stopped it with one sentence. I could have. Grace's hands trembled slightly. Her voice did not. Was this town being tested, Ethan? He looked at her. Or was I? There it was. The question he had avoided asking himself. Both. Grace's eyes flashed. Ethan did not hide from it. I told myself I was testing the town. But after I met you, it became about you. Why? Because I cared what you thought. That doesn't make it better. I know. He took a slow breath. My first wife loved what my ranch gave her. Maybe she loved me once too. I don't know anymore. After she died, I decided I would never again wonder whether a woman wanted me or what belonged to me. Grace remained silent. So I came here dressed like this. Ethan touched his torn hat. It felt clever when I planned it. And now? Now it feels cowardly. Grace's expression shifted, only slightly. Ethan continued, You gave me half your dinner when you thought I couldn't repay you. He pointed toward the water buckets. You let me work beside you. You wouldn't leave. True. Despite herself, the corner of Grace's mouth moved. Ethan stepped closer. Every bucket of water was real. Grace looked at him. Every piece of firewood. He swallowed. Every evening on that bench, every conversation, every time I came here because I wanted to see you. The anger in her face remained, but it was no longer alone. I have 16,000 acres of land, Ethan said, and I haven't enjoyed one room of that ranch house as much as I enjoyed sitting on a cemetery wall eating half your dinner. Grace looked away. I don't expect you to forgive me today. Good. I haven't earned that. No. But I want the chance to earn it. Grace turned back. No more tests. Never. No more pieces of the truth. Agreed. No deciding what I should know because you're afraid of how I'll react. Ethan nodded. Agreed. Grace looked toward the road leading west. Then start talking. About what? Everything. Ethan blinked. Everything? Every acre? He almost smiled. That may take a while. I have laundry. She pointed to the bench. You can talk while I work. Ethan sat. Grace did not forgive him that morning. That mattered. Forgiveness came slowly, as it should. Over the next several weeks, Ethan stopped trying to impress her and started trying to deserve her trust. He told her about Rebecca. He told her about the loneliness after her death. He told her about Walker Ranch. He told her how frightened he had become of being wanted for the wrong reasons. Grace told him that fear explained his actions but did not excuse them. Ethan agreed. Meanwhile, Silas Mercer's claim collapsed. The certified filing was unquestionable. When Mercer attempted to pressure Grace again, a territorial deputy arrived in Red Creek carrying a notice warning him against interfering with her property. Ethan had paid for the deputy's travel. Grace discovered this and confronted him. "You promised not to solve everything with money." "I paid a legal officer to enforce the law. That's solving something with money." "I couldn't exactly carry the courthouse here myself." Grace stared at him. Then she laughed. It was the first time she had laughed with him since learning the truth. Ethan decided that victory was worth every dollar. Mercer eventually sold his freight operation to another company and left the territory. Grace kept the laundry. Ethan offered to replace the aging building. She refused. He offered a loan. She refused that too. Then one afternoon, Grace surprised him. "I'll accept lumber." Ethan turned. "What? Not as a gift?" "Of course not." "I'll pay your ranch the regular price." He started to protest. Grace raised one finger. "The regular price." Ethan closed his mouth. She smiled. "You're learning." So Walker Ranch supplied lumber at exactly the same rate Ethan charged everyone else. Grace used her own savings to expand the laundry. She added a proper foundation, a larger workroom, and a front porch. Business increased. Something else changed, too. The people of Red Creek became friendlier. Grace noticed. She did not necessarily trust the change. One afternoon, Margaret Caldwell entered the laundry carrying a blue dress. Grace looked up from her sewing. Margaret placed the dress on the counter. "I need the hem repaired." Grace examined it. "I can have it ready Thursday." Margaret remained standing there. "There's something else." Grace waited. Margaret looked uncomfortable. "I said some things." "Yes." "About you and Ethan, I remember." Margaret swallowed. "I was unkind." Grace said nothing. "I'm sorry." Grace studied her for several seconds. Then she nodded. "Thank you for saying it." Margaret seemed surprised. "That's all. What else were you expecting?" "I don't know." Grace picked up the dress. Thursday afternoon. Margaret left. Ethan, who had been repairing a shelf in the next room, stepped into view. "You heard that?" "Every word." "You were very gracious." Grace threaded a needle. "I accepted an apology. I didn't erase my memory." Ethan smiled. "You really are remarkable." "Finish the shelf." "Yes, ma'am." Near the end of August, Ethan asked Grace to ride with him to Walker Ranch. She had never seen it. The trip took most of the morning. When they reached the crest above the valley, Grace pulled her horse to a stop. Below them, cattle spread across the grass like dark flecks against an enormous green plain. Fences crossed distant hills. Barn roofs shone beneath the sun. The ranch house stood beside a row of cottonwoods. Grace stared. "This is yours?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "Most of what you can see." Grace looked left. "Where does it end?" "That ridge." She turned right. "And there, past the creek." Grace stared at him. "You said 16,000 acres." "I did." "I understood the number." She looked back at the valley. "I don't think I understood the number." Ethan laughed. At the house, Grace met the ranch hands. Every one of them was American men from Wyoming, Colorado, Nebraska, Texas, and Kansas who had come west looking for wages and land of their own. They clearly respected Ethan. That surprised Grace more than the size of the ranch. She watched him ask about an injured horse. He knew its name. He asked about a ranch hand's sick mother. He remembered details. He ate lunch at the same table as the workers. No silver service, no servants waiting behind chairs. Afterward, Ethan took Grace into the ranch house. It was clean, comfortable, and painfully empty. Grace walked through the parlor. "You live here alone?" "Mostly. This house has 6 bedrooms." 7. Grace stared at him. You own a 7-bedroom house and chose to sleep in boarding stables while pretending to be poor? When you say it that way, it sounds foolish. It was foolish. I've accepted that. She smiled. Then Ethan showed her the study. Against one wall stood the iron safe. He opened it. Inside were deeds, account ledgers, contracts, cash, and several personal items. On top rested the torn hat he had worn into Red Creek. Grace touched the damaged brim. You kept it. I thought I should. Why, so I remember what people saw. Grace looked at him. And what did they see? A man they thought didn't matter. Grace placed the hat back inside. Keep it. I intend to. Somewhere you can see it. Ethan waited. Grace's voice softened. So neither of us forgets what a person looks like when everyone else believes they aren't worth kindness. Ethan closed the safe slowly. 3 weeks later, he asked Grace to marry him. He did not make a public spectacle. He did not bring a diamond from New York. He did not kneel in the middle of Red Creek. They were sitting on the same bench outside the laundry where they had spent so many evenings. The sun was going down. Grace was repairing a work shirt. Ethan had been unusually quiet. Finally, she lowered the shirt. You're making me nervous. I've been trying to find the correct words. That's dangerous. He smiled. Then his expression became serious. Grace, I came to Red Creek because I wanted to find a woman who could pass a test. Her eyebrow rose. I know, terrible beginning. Very. So let me start again. He took her hand. I don't want to test you. I don't want to rescue you. And I don't want you to become someone different because of what I own. Grace's expression softened. I want a partner. He looked into her eyes. I want the woman who told me my lies were cowardly. They were. I want the woman who makes me pay full price for lumber. As you should. I want the woman who gave half her dinner to a stranger when she barely had enough for herself. Grace's eyes became bright. Ethan's voice lowered. I love you. The humor left her expression. I think I started loving you before I knew what to call it. He squeezed her hand. If you're willing, I would like to spend the rest of my life earning the trust you were brave enough to give me twice. Grace looked down at their joined hands. For a moment, Ethan was more frightened than he had been facing stampedes, winter storms, or Silas Mercer. Then Grace said, I have conditions. Ethan breathed out. Of course you do. The laundry remains mine. Yes. I keep my own accounts. Yes. I work if I want to work. Yes. You never test me again. Never. And if you ever disguise yourself as a poor ranch hand to investigate my character, I will personally throw you into the horse trough. Ethan laughed. That sounds fair. Grace looked at him. Then yes. He stopped laughing. Yes. Yes, Ethan. He kissed her, slowly, carefully, not like a man claiming a prize, like a man being given something precious that he understood could never be purchased. 3 months after Ethan Walker entered Red Creek wearing torn clothes and muddy boots, the bell of the little white church rang for their wedding. The building was crowded. Some people attended because they loved Grace. Some respected Ethan. Others undoubtedly came because the story had become the most talked-about event Red Creek had seen in years. Margaret Caldwell sat in the second row. Ruth Parker sat near the back. Aunt May sat in front crying before the ceremony even began. Grace wore a pale blue cotton dress she had sewn herself. Ethan had offered to buy anything she wanted. Grace had told him she already owned exactly what she wanted. When she walked down the short aisle, Ethan's hands began to shake. Those hands had handled ropes in blizzards. They had pulled injured cattle from flooded creeks. They had signed contracts worth more than many businesses. Now they trembled because one woman was walking toward him. The minister performed the ceremony simply. When he asked whether anyone objected, the church became silent. It was different from the silence in the Silver Star Saloon. That silence had come from shock. This one came from respect. Everyone in that little church had watched two stubborn people make mistakes confront them and build something honest afterward. No one objected. After the ceremony, Grace and Ethan stepped into the bright afternoon sun. People gathered around them. Congratulations came from every direction. Eventually, Grace pulled Ethan aside. "I have a question." "What, do you still have that awful hat?" Ethan smiled. "It's in the safe." "Beside the ranch deed?" "Yes." "Good." She took his hand. "Keep it there." "I will. I want our children to see it someday." Ethan looked at her. "Children?" Grace gave him a look. "Did you think I intended to fill 7 bedrooms with furniture?" For once, Ethan Walker had no answer. Grace laughed. Within a year, she moved the laundry's bookkeeping operation to Walker Ranch while keeping the Red Creek building open under the management of 2 local women she employed. She continued sewing when she wanted to. She continued keeping her own accounts. Ethan never argued about either. Well, almost never. Their first child was born 2 years later, a daughter. They named her Anna. Their son Benjamin followed 3 years after that. The torn hat remained in Ethan's safe. Years later, when Anna was old enough to ask why her father had kept such an ugly thing, Ethan told her the story. He told her how he had once believed the best way to find honesty was to hide the truth. Grace, sitting across the room, corrected him. "He means he was stubborn." Ethan nodded. "Extremely stubborn." He told Anna how people had laughed at him, how one woman had not, how that woman had shared her dinner before she knew whether he could ever give anything back. Then Grace added the most important part. "Your father thought the lesson was about finding the right woman." Ethan looked at her. "It wasn't." "Not entirely." Grace took the old hat from Anna's hands. "The lesson was about how we treat people when we believe they have nothing to offer us." She placed the hat carefully back inside the safe. "Money can hide character just as easily as poverty can reveal it." Ethan smiled. After all those years, Grace could still leave him without a better answer. So he simply took her hand. The same hand that had once been red from lye soap. The same hand that had repaired shirts late into the night. The same hand that had accepted his only after making him earn her trust again. Outside, cattle moved across the Wyoming grass. Inside, their children laughed somewhere down the hallway of a house that no longer felt empty. Ethan Walker had gone to Red Creek searching for proof that someone could love him without his wealth. What he found was something better. A woman who taught him that love was never something a man could discover through a test. It had to be built, one honest choice at a time. And sometimes the person who appears to have the least to give is the one offering the thing money cannot buy. Kindness without calculation, loyalty without reward, and love without a price. If you've stayed with this story until the end, thank you for listening. Stories from the American frontier remind us that wealth, reputation, and appearances can disappear quickly, but character has a way of revealing itself when nobody expects a reward. If you enjoyed Ethan and Grace's story, please like this video and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary choices in the American West. Until next time, take care, and thank you for listening.